Welcome to Oyate Today. Oyate in Lakota means people. Brought to you by Native Sun News Today. Hi, welcome to Oyate Today. I am your host, Richie Richards. Oyate Today is produced by Tim and Jackie Gallego. Tim is an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. Our guest tonight, our very special guest tonight, is Commissioner Jeannie Hovland of the Administration for Native Americans, as well as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Native American Affairs. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Definitely, and you've come all the way from Washington, D.C. to be on the Oyate Today show, so we're honored. Thank you.
Thank you.
As well as other things. Commissioner, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came into these dual roles, please?
Sure. Actually, I'm an enrolled member of the Flanders Santee Sioux tribe. I was born and raised in South Dakota, not too far from here. I graduated from the Belle-Fourche High School and moved around a little bit and eventually wanted to find my way back home and settled as an adult in Sioux Falls area. I worked for Senator Thune for about 13 years handling his tribal issues and spent a lot of time in the tribal communities. And I was nominated for this position as commissioner and confirmed by the Senate in June of 2018 and relocated out to Washington, D.C.
Wow, what's that experience been like so far?
It's been an amazing experience. I've learned a lot. I have a lot to learn. It's great to be back home in South Dakota. And so, yes, I've learned a lot. I've got to see a lot of the different communities, the different cultures we have in our other Native nations, and it's been a wonderful experience.
What is your role then as Commissioner for the Administration for Native Americans? What's your role and what's some of those priorities you have in that role?
Well, as Commissioner of the Administration for Native Americans, primarily I oversee our discretionary grants, and I believe we're going to talk about them a little bit in depth. So that's one of my primary roles. I'm also to be an effective and visible advocate for Native Americans across the Department of Health and Human Services and other federal agencies. So I take that role very seriously. It's important for me to be an advocate, and in order to do so, I need to spend time in communities. I can't be an effective advocate from behind a desk in Washington. So I've made it a priority to get to as many of our communities as I can.
I'm sure you're learning a lot then in the uniqueness of each of these communities.
Absolutely.
Definitely. What is your role then as Deputy Assistant for Native Americans, and what are some of your priorities? Do those roles kind of overlap then, or how does that work?
That's a really good question, and yes, they do. So this dual role was created a few years ago. So the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Native American Affairs is for the Administration for Children and Families. That's the human services side of the Department of Health and Human Services. So under ACF, I'll refer to it as ACF, there are 10 programs, 9 of which provide funding or services to Native communities, really important services on the human services side, like LIHEAP, or LEHAP, that we're all familiar with, TANF, Head Start, ANA, of course, the Children's Bureau, the Office on Trafficking in Persons. And so our tribe really felt that we needed to have a voice, a tribal voice in leadership to help with those programs in consultation. So my role is to also host annual consultation for ACF, of which I did recently out in California.
Awesome. How'd that go?
Very well. We had a really good attendance, talked about really important issues in regards to TANF and LEHAP, and funding is always one of the primary issues.
There's a lot of uniqueness within each of these nations, but I'm sure there's some common threads that go throughout. Are you starting to kind of define those common threads and commonalities amongst the nations then?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I've made it an important part of my mission to attend as many of the HHS regional consultations this year as I could. I know that you followed me on Facebook and saw my travels. HHS has 11 regions. And, the focus really that I heard was the not only opioid but substance abuse in general, HHS's response to that, as well as how that ties into human trafficking and the murdered and missing Indigenous peoples in our Native communities, as well as how it affects our Native urban relatives. So really that was at the forefront of many of the conversations, and wanting HHS to really take a lead in addressing this from the Health and Human Services side.
Sure. Now, I understand that on September 11th of this year, 2019, you testified before the House of Natural Resources Committee's Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Tell us about your testimony and the importance of this issue being at that national level for our communities.
Well, I'm grateful that this issue is finally, on a national level. And to all those families that have had a family member missing or murdered without seeing justice or having closure, that their voices are being heard now. And from the White House through Congress, there's momentum and it's become a priority. So that was very important to this hearing. And I talked about, again, how at the Department of Health and Human Services, we've heard from our tribes that we need to bring in our services to address the vulnerable populations, that we provide funding and services to. Substance abuse goes hand in hand, as I talked about, with human trafficking, which can lead to MMIW, mental health, those with mental health, and then on the human services side, victims of domestic violence, of trauma, historical trauma, vulnerable populations, those runaway and homeless youth. So really strengthening the services we have and working collaboratively. I should mention that another role that I have is I chair the Interdepartmental Council on Native American Affairs. This council was created by statute under the Native American Programs Act, which established ANA. And it really was Congress's way of saying that HHS needs to be working collaboratively and not in silos when we're addressing priorities, issues, and budgets that affect Native Americans. So this council was inactive for several years, and I chair it. The vice chair is the Director of Indian Health Service. So I've had a great partnership with Admiral Oyate. We've reestablished this council. We've met 3 times, and we're working to develop a framework to address how we can strengthen our communities, our Native communities, and really try to change the statistics on human trafficking and murdered and missing Indigenous.
Sure. And you recently came to Rapid City to not only attend the Black Hills Powwow, one of the greatest powwows in the nation, in our humble community here in the Black Hills, but what other events have you attended while you were out here during the Black Hills Powwow?
Well, I flew in yesterday. I was in Minneapolis yesterday at Native Language Summit. Today I am here with the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Interior, Tara Sweeney. We're meeting with the Great Plains tribal leaders to talk about reclaiming our Native communities in regards to law enforcement, human trafficking, murdered and missing Indigenous. And so I will be speaking this afternoon on the Health and Human Services side of addressing how we can reclaim our Native communities.
And what other events are you going to be attending?
So I will also be presenting Friday at the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Economic Summit and talking about how our funding can be used in our communities to address economic development. And I will be attending the 100th birthday of Marcelo LeBeau, member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe and veteran, World War II veteran, as well as a powwow. So,
that's pretty special.
Yeah, got a fantastic week here.
That's pretty special. Let's take a break, Commissioner. We'll be back after a couple of minutes.
Closed captioning for Oyate Today is brought to you by Black Hills Energy. Ready.
Native Sun News has been voted the best weekly newspaper in its class for 2015 by the South Dakota and North Dakota Newspaper Associations. You can find a copy of the Native Sun News at many businesses and vending machines in Rapid City and the surrounding area, and on all 9 reservations. We publish every Wednesday, so advertisers and subscribers can reach our diverse readership by calling 605-721-1266. The Native Sun News covers the other side of the story.
You can't predict life's ups and downs. You just give it all you've got to stay on top. But it's easier with a partner like Security First Bank. Since 1898, we've been riding with you through the country's biggest ups and downs. And this is where we'll stay. Security First Bank, a relationship you can count on. Member FDIC.
I want some more.
What's he doing?
But he can't.
Look at him. It's just not done.
Please, sir, I want some more.
More? More?
More? Please, sir.
He has asked for more!
Thank you.
What?
Well, he did say please. Sir.
Yes, he did. And thank you.
Yeah, and thank you.
He's a wonderful boy. A delightful boy.
Please, and thank you. Pass it on.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome back to Oyate Today. Once again, our guest tonight is Commissioner Jeannie Hovland. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the great discussion so far.
Yeah, thank you.
And definitely thank you for having a voice for our communities when you're out and about and visiting these different nations in Washington, D.C., so thank you. Earlier we were talking about MMIW and human trafficking. Can you talk to me and tell us a little bit about your work regarding human trafficking? And a major part of that is data collection. So let's talk a little bit about that, please.
Okay, and that's an excellent issue that we are looking at, is the actually lack of data collection that there is both on MMIW and on human trafficking specific to our Native population. So I've been working closely with the Office on Trafficking in Persons, which is a program under ACF, the Administration for Children and Families. And what we have found out is that there is a little bit of data being collected through the toll-free number that they have at the Office of Trafficking in Persons. And they're able to provide help and resources and get a little bit of data, but we're very, very underrepresented on what is really taking place with the Native population. So I've reached out to our partners at the Department of Interior, the Department of Justice, about how we can work collaboratively. But as you know, data on our people can be a sore subject, and it really, when we're collecting data on our people, it needs to be driven by our tribes. And I want to make sure that we respect data sovereignty. So I've been talking about this with our tribal leaders at consultation. How can we get this data in a way that's respectful to our people and stays in the hands of our people, but is able to help the federal government to move this issue forward? Mm-hmm. And so they recommended that I work with our urban Indian health programs for our urban population and our tribal epidemiology centers, which I failed to mention. I'm meeting with them from across the country. Happen to be in Rapid City this week meeting, so I'll be meeting with them tomorrow to see how we can move this forward in getting this data and being respectful of our culture as we get this data on. Human trafficking will be our focus, and then working with the Department of Interior. Assistant Secretary Sweeney's been a fantastic partner as they lead their efforts on data collection specific to the tribal communities.
Whose back should that fall on then? Who should take that role of collecting data then? That's one gray area I'm not too, familiar with as far as who should be responsible and head this up. Who do you?
That's an excellent question, and a question that we've been asking, with our tribal leaders. And one of the questions that was talked about is having our tribes gather the data. And so they've asked recently, what information do your agencies need? What kind of data? So that is a response that we need to provide. And the Office of Trafficking in Persons is working on formulating, what data is helpful, one, for funding, two, to really be able to address this issue. So we are having those conversations on the data collection. It won't be anything quick. It's going to take time. And that is something that I heard from our tribal leaders, tired and weary of talking about this when our people are going missing and murdered and falling victim to human trafficking. And so I agree. There's things that we can do and that we are doing, which is the prevention piece, the education and awareness, which is one of the priorities that I am leading within the Department of Health and Human Services, because we're really positioned to strengthen individuals, families, and communities. And so that collaboration is really important across our interdepartmental council that I mentioned. And so we're working on a framework together.
What are some of the other things that you're learning about some of the issues regarding MMIW then, or human trafficking, specifically in Indian country?
You know, both in Indian country and outside of Indian country, there needs to be education on what human trafficking is and what it really looks like. I think there's still a perception of what we see in the movies about human trafficking, which does happen, but there's a lot of human trafficking that taking place that is closer to home, that can happen with people that you know, that you're close to. So really bringing that education to the community level and throughout the agencies of what human trafficking is very important.
It's not just so much pimps and johns anymore. It's a really kind of integrated within even the family structure and such.
Yes.
Sadly, that's
You're right.
that's true. Talk to me a little bit about the Native Youth Kit. I understand this is kind of a prevention tool then. Could we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So ANA, in partnership with the Office of Trafficking in Person, developed a free online Native Youth Toolkit on human trafficking. It's really a great resource for families, after-school programs, schools, or individuals that want to talk about this subject. It's a tough subject, human trafficking. It's age-appropriate, it's culturally appropriate, and it's a toolkit to talk about human trafficking, what it is, and what to do if you know that there's human trafficking that you've identified. It's available on ANA's website, PDF form, you can download it. We've been distributing it at all our conferences. I met with Director Tony Dearman of the Bureau of Indian Education yesterday about how we can bring that into the BIE-funded schools and really start, and that came from our tribal leaders. They said, we really need youth to be involved and to know about this, and how are you reaching out to our youth? So that is one of the ways that we're going to start reaching out to the youth.
So would this be almost a part of the curriculum then, or some kind of teaching, educational tool that would come into the schools, or how does that work?
It could be, or it could be in an assembly form. It could be in a health class. So it could be used in any of those ways.
Definitely, definitely. What other resources are available then for persons or families, or excuse me, victims or families of victims that may be available online or through your programs then that families can get and learn more about human trafficking, MMIW?
Yes, absolutely. Good question. So the Office of Trafficking in Persons is under the Administration for Children and Families, and you can find their website under ACF. They have a toll-free number with resources where they can talk about what human trafficking is. Victims can phone in and they can help them get out of that situation and get to program and services that will help them not only to leave the situation, but to be able to be, to heal and to move forward. So there's that. There's also the Indigenous Women's Resource Center located in Minneapolis, and they have an online toolkit on murdered and missing Indigenous resources. So those are resources there. And then at the Administration for Children and Families, we have our Social and Economic Development Strategies funding, which comes out annually. It'll be issued in January. And there's so much flexibility in the SEDS grant that I just mentioned. And really, those can be used for communities to create a project to address this issue.
Sure. Have you, in your travels and communications and visiting different areas, have you seen really good examples of communities taking it to that next level then, or really stepping up their game when it comes to MMIW and human trafficking on their reservation or in their tribal territories? Are there examples, good examples out there around the country somewhere?
Actually, there are. There's a tribe in Washington that has started their own MMIW, tribally driven program and project and response, and we are planning to visit with them so we don't reinvent the wheel, and see how we can learn and provide best practices to other communities. I'll be traveling with leadership from the Administration for Children and Families next week to a couple of our communities in Alaska that have a one-stop shop of ACF programs that really are there to strengthen the individuals, the families, the communities. So looking forward to hearing how they're able to provide a one-stop shop and have a really good program and resources, and how we can encourage that in other communities.
Sure. Commissioner Hovland, I really want to thank you for wearing the red too. It really symbolizes the movement itself for MMIW. We'll be back after a short break.
I have a dream. soldier. I have a dream. I want to be a construction worker.
You can help kids' dreams come true by donating to Rural America Initiative's Building Fund.
More than 2 million men and women have served in our military since 9/11. Now, many of them are transitioning back into civilian life. They're considering career options, writing resumes, starting businesses. ACP AdvisorNet can help. ACP AdvisorNet is a nonprofit online community where Americans can offer career advice to those who have served. Now we can serve those who served us by helping them to find their next career. Visit acpadvisornet.org.
Being connected to him with the earth.
Positive pride. Pride of being Lakota.
Look around you and look at your culture. Look at the people who care about you. There is hope. There is always hope. There will always be hope.
Suicide isn't the Lakota way. If someone you know needs help, please call 867-HOPE, a public service message from the Lakota Voice Project.
When discrimination happens in our community, and it does happen,
then it's time to stand up and speak out to make it stop.
Discrimination hurts and excludes.
We can be better than that.
People of Black Hills have a connection to each other, and none of us deserve discrimination.
The Rapid City Human Relations Commission can help with discrimination issues in housing, employment, and public accommodations. And each of us, when we see it or hear it, can do our part to end discrimination.
You have a responsibility to stand up and speak out.
Hi, welcome back to Oyate Today. Once again, our guest tonight is Commissioner Jeannie Hovland. Thank you so much for being here, ma'am. And it's been a pleasure to have you on our show. Earlier, you had mentioned the social and economic development strategies. Let's kind of expand on that a little bit more, if you could, and talk about the opportunities out there.
Absolutely. So at the Administration for Native Americans, we have funding for 3 program areas, and social and economic development strategies is our largest, most flexible funding. And that really, Congress allowed a lot of flexibility in that. So I talked about how it can be used for, first of all, we fund projects, not programs. Mm-hmm. Our funding is usually up to 3 years, up to $350,000 a year. And it can be used to address social issues, human trafficking. We have some reentry programs. We have some programs that have assisted victims of violence in their communities, help them to get driver's license, jobs, and be able to heal and move forward.
Wow.
And what's great about our funding is that we can incorporate our culture and our languages, which is why I believe so many of our projects are so successful. Mm. And also economic developments. Like I stated, I'll be talking Friday at the Great Plains Economic Development Summit. They wanted me to talk about agriculture. Our funding, we have a lot of farm-to-table food sovereignty grants right now across the United States. In our Pacific regions, up in Alaska, food sovereignty has been a really big, popular project that our...
Could you tell me what food sovereignty means? Because I've heard this term, I've seen it in different places and areas, but what does this mean? What is food sovereignty? And this might be for some of our audience as well.
Sure. So my perception of what food sovereignty is, what I've seen through our project, is our tribes are coming back to our traditional ways of knowing what our traditional foods were, from planting it to harvesting it to preparing it. And there's a lot of benefits to it. The educational purposes, the health benefits, the intergenerational activities that take place, because it's often the elders.
Sure.
But we're in charge of our food, and we are having healthy food choices again, and back to our traditional and cultural foods.
And bringing them some of that reliance off of some of the government aid and commodities and things like that.
Right.
Awesome. What is the Association for Native Americans doing to assist in preservation of Native American languages, indigenous languages then?
So at ANA, we have 2 funding areas for languages specifically. One is the Esther Martinez Initiative, and that is an excellent grant. It's a little more prescriptive than our other language area. But it's been very effective. It requires a minimum of 500 hours of immersion-specific courses to be taught in either a survival school or a school nest. And then we have the preservation and maintenance language program, which is more flexible. It can be taught in the community or in a school setting or both. It can be immersion, but it doesn't have to be. Both of them you can have school or teacher certifications so that our speakers can come into the school and be paid for their services to teach the language. So both of them have been very effective.
Definitely, I could imagine. Can you tell our viewers about other ANA grant opportunities?
Yeah, so our third program area is the environmental regulatory enhancement, and this really is for our tribes to be able to develop their environmental codes or natural resources and be able to enforce it. I'm glad to see we've had a lot more applications this last year for this funding. I'd like to see our tribes take more advantage of the environmental regulatory enhancement. So I've been trying to get out there and talk a little bit more about that funding area. So.
I know that you go out and you speak, and you're invited to speak at different events, but are there events that you put on and that people can come and learn more about your programs, more about your grant opportunities? Is there programs like that or events like that that you've put on then, or your department has put on?
Well, I've been trying, we have our annual grantee meeting, which is all of our grants come together, and we try to bring in other agencies to present, and that's more for our grantees to learn about what other funding resources are out there, and for us to learn from them. But otherwise, I try to invite myself to events through what's taking place here in Rapid City, the events throughout the week, as well as organizations like National Congress of American Indians, tribal language summits. And we do host the language summit in conjunction with the Department of Education and the Department of Interior, which I was at earlier this week, specific to Native languages, since we are the 3 agencies that fund Native languages.
Could you tell me what you're most proud of that in your time there? You said you were there for a year and a half. What are you most proud of so far?
Wow. Well, to narrow that down, I would say I am most proud of we hosted our first ever interdepartmental council town hall with youth earlier this summer, and only youth were allowed to speak.
Wow.
And tell us how we can better serve their generation throughout the Department of Health and Human Services. What were their priorities? And really overwhelmingly they said, we want to be at the table and we want to talk about these tough subjects.
Thank you so much for your service, ma'am. I appreciate you being here. I would like to thank our producers. I would like to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Prairie Edge for hosting our show tonight. And lastly, if you'd like to learn more about Oyate Today, please visit our website at www.oyatetoday.org. Thank you. You've been watching Oyate Today, brought to you by Native Sun News Today.